that 24-hour performance, I'm sure that was, I saw that you said that was the hardest thing you had done.
I think that that's almost true. Yeah, it was never meant to be anything. It's funny. It was really just sort of like an exercise. It was something for me. It was like quasi private. It almost felt, which it obviously wasn't. Like, I didn't really notice or feel that 5,000 plus people tuned in to watch it while I was doing it, because I was alone, obviously, the whole time. It was also in the depths of COVID, so there was really sort of very little sense of scale with it. Yeah, it was not just hard in like an abject way, it was just very challenging on every sort of human level. I would say much more so emotionally even than physically. The physical wasn't really that bad compared to the sort of mental strain. I was just talking about this with somebody. It's very jarring to realize that you can run out of thoughts, in less than a day. I feel as though I had thought of every single thought I could have possibly thought by hour 18, even maybe before. I had sort of contemplated everything. I had no interest by the end in like even producing a new idea or thinking about the past or the future or even the present. There was nothing going on in the present. I was just walking. So it was very, there's something quite, just very unexpected about reaching that point, that threshold where your brain, where you're in the nothing zone.
Yeah. Were you live streaming it at the time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's completely live streamed, and it was done through Marina Abramovich's platform, MAI, Marina Abramovich Institute, and she sort of like co-produced it and with me. Yeah, we had advertised it for about a week in advance, and I just never expected so many people to view it. It was. Yeah, I'd say probably about 5,500 people or so.
Because you were expecting at least some people to be, tuning into the live stream, did that add a level of pressure? I mean, in thinking about those internal thoughts and, the amount of time passing by, did it feel like there was more pressure because you knew that there were people watching and not just an audience that could stop by, right? Who could be in the room with you, but at any moment somebody can tune in and see it.
My live performances, I'm always blinded somehow. I'm always wearing like contact lenses, or there's always some kind of a barrier between myself and like my vision and the audience. I can never really see them, and they can never really see into my eyes. So I think that's always sort of been a strategic like limit that I've put in place that is very intentional, and I think it comes from a desire to protect myself and my the performers within my work, but also protect the audience from my gaze, I think, at the same time. And I think that there's a lot that can happen when you free everybody involved of the gaze. I don't really feel them staring at me so much as I feel their energy, when you sort of create that blindness. Yeah, I of course I didn't need the contact lenses for this performance. It's the only one I haven't worn before because it was all done through the screen. And that, that webcam was the barrier. The way I see it, it's just a transfer of energy rather than like dissecting or consumption. I think I've managed to find a sort of a way of presenting my work that actually doesn't leave me that vulnerable to what feels like consumption or judgment or other things that would, I think, put a pressure on that I'm always just excited to be in front of the audience, rather than fearful or prepared to have something taken from me. At least I think that that's what I think people often fear when they're in front of people, is to have something taken from them, to have their, part of their soul kind of chipped away or something. It's always a very generative space that I try to make, where everybody is given something. There's more of everything. There's abundance. There's generosity, and I felt you feel it from more of a distance, obviously, when you're not with anybody directly, but somehow you do through the ether feel the generosity and the love of the audience.
And when you're hiding your eyes, either with the blindfold or the contacts, is that in a way to create yourself as more of an object, similar to how, a Greek or Roman sculpture has eyeballs, but they don't really have a pupil, or they don't have, it's more of just like this blank surface. Is it more in creating yourself as an object instead of catching the gaze of a viewer and having a human to human moment?
Yeah, I think so. I think that is probably accurate. I don't think of it, and again, like, I don't really think of it in such an abstract way as like, dehumanizing an object could, as like something that is necessarily like negative in my view. I think it's something that just like allows for a different kind of transfer of energy. I think that you have a transfer of energy with objects. So if you have that sort of same, kind of format of giving and receiving as you do with a sculpture, without necessarily being subject to the sort of same protocols as you are with like a human being, then that maybe opens you up to, to different forms of energy that you kind of didn't really maybe necessarily know you could have with a human body. It's kind of amazing what happens when we interact with human bodies or things that look like human bodies to us. I think I've always just been really fascinated with that, with my personal relationship with classical sculpture. When I look at a Bernini, when I look at something from, ancient Greece or Rome or what have you, it really does, I think, it's very different from looking at a painting. It's very different from looking at an object, or even when you're sort of, I think, sort of in the proximity of a sacred object that is clearly made for human use, like an old teapot or an old, or something like where you can kind of almost see the negative space where a human body would fit as well. That too, I think, has a very particular kind of frequency to us. We recognize it. We recognize ourselves in it. And I think it's so, it's always been a really fascinating and profound way to articulate our humanity to each other, like for me. So I guess I've always thought of myself more as a sculptor than anything else.
Well, and there's things that you do in that, even when it's you performing it, you are like a sculpture. And I think you may not be completely thinking of yourself as an object, but I think it is fascinating that you do things that can lean toward that. Like the contacts create a certain barrier, but a lot of the times, you are on a platform or a plinth, which is very much like an ancient Greek or Roman sculpture, or you'll have a dirt or sand, barrier where you filled, some kind of liquid, whether water or red substance to show as blood, or, there are these, it is interesting how you put yourself in a way that is like a traditional sculpture.
I definitely use signifiers with that. I think it's also, part of the protocol of interacting with, a human being versus an object versus a sort of a stage, right? I think a lot of it is also infrastructure that keeps me safe and keeps the context right. Because if I am, or my performers are, too accessible physically to the public, if they feel, if there's not a glass through which to observe the statue. If it's just, when you walk through the Met, when you walk through the Louvre or the Hermitage or the Prado, you're not seeing, these sculptures just sort of sitting on the floor. And I think that the reason for the elevation really has to do with sort of, it's not to like create hierarchy so much as it is to just like establish, I guess space and rules and just context that doesn't encourage people to go on their weird impulses, which are natural, but it's I think it just creates a level of decorum that I think allows everyone to consume the idea as opposed to the bodies on display. Again, there's just something that happens to us when we recognize ourselves in an object, when we recognize ourselves in a body, when we recognize ourselves in the human form, in a figure, where we see ourselves in it, where we want to sort of experience the romance or the pain or the whatever. People will just touch you if you're too close to them. I've had so many experiences, and I have a lot of work that's undocumented that I was doing, very young, very early on, stuff that was more in the, sort of a more underground kind of realm, in clubs and in sort of noise music venues in Montreal, Zurich, wherever. And I was doing stuff in like weird basements with like no space, and 40 people sort of crammed into a broom closet or whatever, and of course we would always get shut down. But I'm just, the number of times where people have like kind of inappropriately inserted themselves into the work. I do insist on, I guess, just like a certain order, because I also know like what I'm trying to articulate and what I'm not trying to let happen. I almost feel like I'm oftentimes kind of choreographing the audience more than myself. I sort of like reject the idea of like people calling my work like dance, or I don't even really identify with like performance artists that like preciously, right? Because I think it's just so it's like such a box, and I don't really have like a super formal training or like movement culture in me. They're just shapes, and the body's like, it feels like an incidental and convenient, and in the beginning affordable, like medium to be working around. And it's one that I understand, but I think my brain looks like a sculptor's brain for the most part.
What I think is really beautiful too about what you do and separates you from other, performance artists is there is a grandeur in a way of the work that you're creating that is unusual usually for performance art, right?
A friend of mine, Janelle Zara, recently, like she and I go in hard on the DMs quite often about art, and she's an art writer. She said something about art having originally been a spiritual practice, a spiritual gesture, and we talk a lot about beauty, and I really think that beauty is so important. I really do. And it's funny because I'm sitting next to the work, Oyster Knife, that I did in 2020 when, I'd gone from pneumotherapy, which was a piece that was so high on the aesthetic Richter scale. I had 4,000 plus stems with lilies and hyacinths, and there was sugar dripping from the ceiling, and I had a gigantic magnolia branch, which is how I got this tattoo here, and it was just very, very, very sexy, to having no production capacities in the depths of COVID, sort of sequestering in my mom's apartment in Montreal, not allowed to go back into the US on my little O1 visa. And, it's a work that I did where I had I'd stripped it of all of that, and I kind of had no aesthetic capacities. And it came kind of out of a conversation with Marina, where she was like, well, in the 70s, all we had was to wear was dirty white, dirty black, and dirty gray. So I was wearing dirty gray, but it kind of was like my love letter to like the performance art of the 70s, and I'm thinking of Marina, but I'm also, of course, thinking of like Pope L, God rest his soul, recently passed, and Decay of Senga Ngudi, who I'm a huge fan of. I was also thinking about, a bit later on, Amendieta, who I feel like is just someone who works with nature, who works with what's there, who works with her body. And I feel like everything I do is somehow an homage to her. She feels like such a North Star for me, and always has. I think it was the first time I'd really stripped down to like very, very little, even less than what I had when I was like sneaking into clubs when I was 16 and doing stuff. But it was kind of like, it kind of became like a rebirth of my whole practice and thinking of like, the aesthetics of it as very functional, because I think beauty has a very, very strong function. I don't think it's useless. I don't think it's superfluous. I don't really like thinking of it as like decorative and I don't know, a lot of like, I have funny relationships with like, some performance art and performance artists who I think function from more sort of a purist standpoint of like, like rejecting aesthetics and beauty and all of that. And I really see it more as like like when I look at art from West Africa and Haiti and sort of, these places that sort of birthed a lot of the ritualistic practices that I think, from my diaspora that I really identify with very, deeply, and think about often when I'm kind of making these works, not just visually, but also the transformational aspect of them. I don't think there's any piece of any, cloth or any color or any bead or any shell, any brushstroke, anything that doesn't come from, it's purely optical. It all kind of comes from a place of function. I don't think I'm wasting any space with making things pretty.
Yeah, but it's also what makes Oyster Knife really fascinating and probably touching to people, is because within the context of your work, people understand that the aesthetic and the beauty portion, you take that very seriously, even when it is a glass cube, with a handful of performers sitting on a rock. You pick beautiful people to occupy that space, to have your longest, video performance and have it be so minimal. I'm sure just expands the breadth of the context people now understand you with.
Yeah, for the record, I don't choose people just based on their looks. When I'm working with people, I choose it based off of their capacity to first and foremost perform the work. Of course, there's a very there's a sort of physical necessity, and believe it or not, dancers are not always the first choice. Because they don't necessarily have always the stamina. I think more from a mental standpoint, they're used to a kind of quicker bursts of energy. It really is super variable. I mean, some of the best performers I've ever worked with were writers. Writers were really good. But no, there's no physical, kind of, there's really little like, I'm not running a modeling agency, but I think I appreciate what you're saying in that I'm happy that the context allows for people's beauty to really sort of shine through and be visible. Because, I think, like it's people don't necessarily always recognize me, even when they're standing next to my work, not just when I'm body painted, when I'm not as well. Like sometimes I'll be at one of my own openings and like I won't always get clocked. Some people clock me like walking down the street, but then others will not necessarily actually, even when I'm standing next to an actual video of myself, see that it's me or know that it's me. And I think that it has to do with that sort of sacred space, that ritual space. I think it does transform you. And 8 hours, 9 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours really, really transforms your body, your mind, your soul. There's something that emanates that I think looks like something. It looks you're no longer a civilian. You become something else. And I think it's all sort of in the desire and in the purpose of like tapping into like a secret. Like if you sort of pass these thresholds in the body, eventually you reach something that feels unknown, that feels guarded, kept from you by like pain or by pleasure or by limitations or by something that you wouldn't normally do, right? Or you wouldn't normally reach that point in your sort of quotidian life. But then when you get there, it's sort of like an archive room. That's how I think about it. It's like like if you go into like the National Library, into the deepest depths of it, and you're given white gloves, and you can handle these sort of secret documents for for a certain care, and you can look at it, you can touch it, you can memorize it, you can do your damnedest to take a photo with your brain, but then you have to put it back, and then you take off the gloves and you leave, and it's locked, and you can never take anything back with you. So it's sort of that's kind of how I feel about it. I'm like, when I leave the performance, I'm like, oh, I feel like I really touched something super, super important. And then a few days later, I'm kind of back to earth, and unless I've picked up a pen and paper right in that very moment, I lose a lot. So you kind of you touch the poetry, you get it, you leave, you forget, and you just kind of have to keep doing it over and over again. But I just think it's very it's drag. It's drag. You get imbued with something for a very very, very limited amount of time. And so I think when you say that you see beautiful people at my work, I'm like, thank you. If they were standing up in a line, in a lineup, I don't think you would necessarily see the same people. You know what I mean? You wouldn't necessarily see me either, like the same way. So I think it's, I don't know.
The recognition thing is interesting. And I wonder how much that is you going through a physical transformation while you're performing a work, or how much of it is the way that we're conditioned to see art. When we go to a gallery or a museum, there's something that is, even when it's touched by the human hand, there's something that feels spiritual in that experience, and it can very easily feel like maybe human hands didn't touch a piece, And so when somebody's coming into a gallery setting and they're seeing you on the monitor or on the wall, and you're standing next to them, we've been trained to just kind of look at a piece of art and only kind of see this thing and not think about the imperfect person that's just like us, standing right next to us, kind of observing the same moment.
Yeah, well, it's a new feeling for me because I didn't really have a super, like, I didn't push as hard into the object-based world or part of my practice until, just a few years ago, because I wanted to be very meticulous about how I did that. I wanted to build a language around it that was super concise and specific and consistent. Now that I've done that, I can attend my own shows, because before I was always in the art. I was performing 100% of the time. Now I'm maybe performing like 20% of the time for the sort of shows that I have.
Welcome, seekers of wisdom and creativity. If the conversations here on Sissinek have stirred your inner depths and ignited the flames of inspiration, I invite you to venture further into the collective unconscious of our artistic community. By subscribing to our Substack channel, you will unlock extended dialogues that delve deeper into the rich tapestry of ideas shared by artists, designers, and creators. These extended versions of our conversations are akin to uncovering the hidden layers of the psyche, offering profound insights and revelations. In addition, you will gain access to exclusive question and answer sessions where the archetypes of the creativity reveal their mysteries, and guest articles that serve as guiding stars on your journey of self-discovery and creative expression. Embrace this opportunity to enrich your inner world and join us in this sacred gathering place. Subscribe today at sisinek.substack.com, and together let us explore the depths of the human soul through the lens of art and design.
Well, like it's not just the sculptures. Yeah, it's like the videos, the sculptures perform, the videos perform, the photographs perform, everything else performs. Everything that I make performs. Because everything that I make, I treat exactly like a body. So, when I put it into a gallery, into a museum, into anything, it just feels like the longest performance of my life. The longest performance I've ever done was 8 days, non-consecutive, like 8 hours a day. And then the longest performance I've ever done consecutively was Oyster Knife. So that's the 24 hours. But now that, these pieces have lives of their own, I'm like, oh my God, that performance has been going on for 7 months, for a year and a half, It's nice, it's new, and it feels like it's mine. It feels like it's something, it's a way that I've reconciled and kind of almost scammed my way into, being the artist I never trained to be, but that I always wanted to be and that I always knew I could be. It's super exciting. It's really great. And I've become more meticulous with how the performances happen, because to be honest with you, I don't think I have that many left in me. I'm 26. I started when I was very young. I started when I was 16, 17. And I'm aware that I have a ballerina's lifespan with what I do. I'll probably be performing until I'm like in my 40s, in some capacity. But at Oyster Knife, I was 22. I don't think I could do it again. I don't think I could do it now. I would have to train very rigorously for a good amount of time, but it's sort of like I am essentially a professional athlete. And so I know that time's limited, and I'm really interested in doing the remaining performances that I want to do. But I'm like, at one point, I think there will be a time where I will be so happy to completely hand myself over to the sculptural world and to have a catalog of greatest hits, and like sort of like these legendary like musicians who you look to where you're like, you know what? They're like, I just think it's so elegant when somebody's like, I don't need to make a new song. Here's the canon that I've built. Marina always says, she's like, if you're a good artist, you might have one good idea. If you're a great artist, you might have 2 in your lifetime, and that's it. I'm at peace with that,
But also, it's part of our job as artists to continue to change, whether that's you decide to teach or you decide to go into sculpture. I don't think that an artist needs to necessarily explore the same idea over the course of their whole career.
Well, I think when it comes to medium, I feel when I'm sculpting, I've come up with a method of sculpting that feels so much like the performances. First of all, they're 3D scans from performances, but even if I've done like a few in studio, like I've got ways of doing it that is super coherent with how I perform live. And I think that if you can kind of recognize that, if you can recognize your own practice between a performance to a sculpture, or between a sculpture to a painting, or between it feels, if you can make a through line and you could be like, this is the same thing to me, then nothing's changed. And, I'm going for longevity here. I've been very grateful to be received so generously, by a much wider audience than I'm used to in the last even just 6 months. But, I want to be around for a while. So I need to find ways to do that. And I think I have.
I remember reading that Christian Boltanski, he said, similar to what Marina said, but he said, I could never do fashion because a fashion designer has to come up with new ideas every season. But as an artist, you basically can come up with one idea and explore it further and further forever.
I have a great love for fashion, but it also stresses me out for exactly that reason. And now that, when I lived in Paris, all my friends, worked in fashion, and many of them still do, such as one of your previous guests, Julia Regolia, who's, one of my absolute ride or dies. But like, my boyfriend is a photographer who often works in fashion, and it's just the pace and the disposability and the, it's like the opposite of longevity. It's the opposite of sustainability for me for so many reasons. It's like beyond stressful. I still love it. And oh my God, I mean, I actually wanted to be a fashion designer as like my first sort of dream job. Well, it was astronaut, and then puberty.
Yeah, it's astronaut for all of us.
Astronaut. Yeah, but it was actually taxi driver first, and then it was astronaut, and then it was fashion designer, and then somehow I became an artist. I still don't know how to drive. I'm an artist without a driver's license, but yeah. I don't know. It's just the way it kind of transforms the body. The impulse has always sort of been somewhere the same. But yeah, the way that fashion, I think, has always changed the course of human history through the shape of humans is very, it's very romantic to me as an idea. I mean, like Alexander McQueen was like my biggest crush. But yeah,
he was amazing. But you do use fashion. A lot of the times your performances, you're nude for the most part, but I think even I could tell viewing your work that you have a love for fashion, even if it's just peripheral to the work that you're doing. You mentioned that you're like a professional athlete, and I had the same thought thinking about you. And how is it training for these things? I mean, the literal preparation it goes into the work. And when did you realize that training like an athlete is something that you needed to do?
I was never like an athletic kid, so it's funny how it's like kind of come back to bite me. I would hide in the guidance counselor's office at every gym class saying that I was having like a panic attack or something, and she would just let me because she was like over it. I was not like I was by no means interested in sports, and it's funny. I just went to Matthew Barney's show Around the Corner, which is fabulous. And it's all around like American football, but done through this very particular lens. I'm kind of obsessed with it, even though I've never seen a football game in my life. I don't know the rules. But yeah, the athleticism. I think it's kind of amazing how much sport is art and has become art to me in the last few years alone. I've never really engaged with it that way. But getting to understand my body so much more profoundly for these, for the sake of being able to execute these images, to execute these forms, it's been like a really kind of like a romantic exercise. Actually, it's been really poetic and exciting. And I work very, very closely with a trainer based in Montreal. Her name is Marie-Claude Després, and she's the OG. She was like one of the main like touring physical therapists for Cirque du Soleil for many years, and just like, we're talking about someone who spent her 20s kind of, apprenticing, and studying anatomy, where she was dissecting cadavers, and knows and can name every fascia, every nerve, every muscle in the body. So, I've picked up an education in that for the last 4 years with her. And prior there too, I mean, I was just super obsessed always with anatomy and the body and how it works. And having studied Buto somewhat like before kind of, really embarking full throttle into my performance practice, understanding the way the inside of the body moves before the outside was like my biggest fascination. So I'm thinking about like peristalsis. I'm thinking about like the movements of the intestines, the movements of the liver, how the diaphragm and the pelvic floor sort of synchronize, in contraction and release in order to facilitate and expand upon the forms, not only from the outside, but also I think when there's something right on the inside, that's when you really see beauty. Is when you're sort of, the image is completed by the things that you can't even see, and that it's sport, it's anatomy, it's fucking science, And I think that seeing how profoundly the things that you barely see, sometimes barely feel, gaining control over my pterygoid muscle in my in my jaw, or my or my peristalsis, or my I don't know. We do sessions in French, so I really don't know all the English terms for everything, but I've learned so much, how to control things I never knew I even had. It really, really, really makes a huge difference and changes things, defines things. Because I think also it's very natural for us to create somatic pockets in our body all over the place. So, sometimes I'll touch something and I'll realize what tension in one place means in my personal life, in my emotional life, and what's happening to me in a certain moment, how to focus on it, how to change it, how to work through it. Like clay, it's like paint.
Yeah. And as artists, I mean, we have to take care of our tools. And when your tool is the body, it's important to understand how it works and how you can manipulate it as well to do what you need to do for your piece.
Yeah. And it's been now that I'm working a lot more, I've needed to find ways of also just stepping out of that and just being a bit stupid and goofy and not just kind of completely, because I can become extremely, extremely obsessive, I think, is all artists obviously can and often do and have to, but I think I've tried to enforce in recent years a personal life to varying degrees of success. But you don't come home from the office when the office is your flesh,
Yeah.
It is. So it's sort of been a little I guess my recency has just been figuring out how to be a person too. Yeah. But the training is, I mean, when I'm pre-show, there's a good 3 months. It's really rigorous. And now that I have finished a string of shows, exhibitions, live performances, non-live work, sculptures, etc., I am going to switch from output to input mode, as Laurie Anderson says, and I'm going to go and just get re-inspired and think of myself more as a person than an object.
When you're getting inspired, how much do you pull from your past, growing up, the time with your mom, the city you were in, versus the things that you're experiencing in the present?
When I'm coming up with an idea?
Yeah.
Or
yeah. When you're getting inspired, when you're coming up with an idea.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. I don't know how to answer that. I don't always attribute things to. I think it's more rooted in the present, in the moment, in a feeling, in something that's beyond language. Sometimes I make a whole work about something that I don't know what it is. It's a feeling, and then I finish the work and I still don't know what it is. But it's still something, there are things that are beyond language, that exist beyond our understanding, that we experience, that we feel, that we know, that are in our bodies, that we'll never necessarily have the answers to, and that's okay. But they still manifest physically, artistically, otherwise, and they're there, and they're, we can love them. They can be great. But they can firmly be completely on the outside of our realm of understanding forever, and that's okay. So I think when I'm getting inspired, I'm most inspired by the things I don't understand.
Do you have a daily spiritual practice?
No, and I like to keep it that way. My most spiritual time is in my work, and my most meditative time is in my work, or when I'm alone at 4:00 in the morning. I stay up very late, just naturally. And that's when I'm like more sort of in tune with myself. I don't know. If I did, I probably wouldn't tell you. I think that the spirituality, the meditation, the whatever, anything that I experience on a personal level, outside of my work is my own, and I don't really share it. But everything that I am willing to share, it's right there in the museum.
Yeah, I can understand that. Tell me about working with Marina Abramovich, who's, of course, she's really the legend of performance art. And I think the person that really created a space for that to flourish in the last, however many decades. But you specifically, I'd like to know about the workshop that you did, the cleaning the house workshop, where and correct me if I'm wrong, but for 5 days you couldn't eat any food, right? It just was a series of practices that she took you and a group of others through.
I did a workshop with Marina, maybe like 6 or 7 years ago now, in Greece. It was sort of the guinea pig test before it became like public programming, with myself and her and 4 other artists, and we were on this island called Setiphos in Greece, and we didn't eat or speak for 5 days. She did, she was instructing us through exercises and things, but we were basically just no timepieces, no reading material, no technology, obviously, but no way to tell where, when you were, no new information in your body, in your mind, only what was being sort of provided. And then you got blank paper, pencil, and you could document, you could write, you could draw, you could do whatever. But you were really just receiving that information and then the sea, and that's sort of all we had. It was fantastic. It was really, I think it gives you a really nice basis for a base understanding of who you are by the end of that. I love Marina. That's my auntie. She has been extremely generous with her, with her mind, body, and spirit to me and to the world, and to young artists very specifically. She's, I think, very much in a place now where she wants to, and has very successfully just shared the abundance of, all of the bridges she's built, all of the ceilings she's broken through, and many, many, many of us stand on her shoulders. So I give her flowers for that every day that I can. I saw her a couple of days ago, though, and she, I think she's also just such a funny, witty, kind person. We don't really, we talk about work together, but then when we're not talking about work, we're not talking about work. She's really great to talk to about movies and TV and other stuff that are not so serious. I think it's important. She also taught me, that it's important to not be overly serious as an artist, because you're very serious when you're in the work, and then when you're out of the work, you don't necessarily want to be austere on every level of your being. It's important to have variation and levity. Oh my God, levity.
Yeah, it's important to recharge yourself, and if you're taking everything so seriously, it's hard to give fully to a project.
Yeah, I like dumb jokes, and bad TV. I don't know. I think people have this image of performance artists as being very high drama, and I try to avoid that if I can.
Your mom was in theater, and you talk extensively about growing up in that world. But when you think back upon the way you grew up and being around theater, are there particular moments that stand out to you as being something that kind of altered the course of your life?
No, actually. Just the atmosphere overall.
The overall world you lived in was just foundational in a way?
I was very young, so my memories of it are kind of fleeting, but it was an atmosphere of spontaneity and also, you know, it was Buffon theater. It wasn't like, you know, we're not talking about Shakespearean anything. We were talking about like these weird adaptations of Ionesco where there was, you know, maybe someone running around in some disproportionate monstrous costume, and you know, someone else, my mother's, you know, in a fat suit with severed limbs and bald cap and raccoon eyes and an upside down prosthetic ear attached to her forehead under an upside down cross, you know, or something, you know, things like that. That just, I think it just creates a general atmosphere for a kid to be kind of weird, kind of fucked up, kind of not having very many friends in pre-K. But, overall, I think it was fab. I feel like I grew up in the Addams Family. She actually kind of looks like Morticia. So, I needless to say, when I got to kindergarten, you know, after never having gone to daycare and just being raised on a tour bus full of Russian clowns, I walked in and my first trick was to take a plastic cup, hide it under my sweater, and like crack it and sort of like fake breaking my neck because that was something I knew how to do, and I thought people would get a kick out of it, and they didn't. And the teacher almost had a panic attack, and because I was good at it, and I just that kind of was the vibe.
Because it was such a creative environment, I'm sure it just let your mind flourish for those first few years that you were on the bus and traveling with them. And
I mean, I'm sure it did. I've never been exposed to anything else. Yeah, I've never been exposed to anything else. So she always says, like, if I ended up being a kid who loved hockey and she ended up in an arena at training practice at 5 a.m., she would have been just miserable. So, you know, I really just, I can't even give you an answer on that because it just was 100% of my life.
Yeah, it's just so intertwined with who you are. I understand.
Yeah.
I read that you speak 7 different languages. Is that, I would love to know how language has affected or not affected the way that you see the world and maybe how you see your practice.
That's an awesome question. It's an interesting one right now, particularly because I have never used text or language in my work until about 3 weeks ago when I did a show at the AGO in Toronto, where I enlisted a dear friend of mine, Jordan Tannehill, to write a text, a poem that was integrated into the fabric of the installation around this 9-hour piece called Respawn. And I really did love that. It was very new for me. No, I mean, the linguistics thing, you know, it was always just like a special interest of mine, you know, from super young. I grew up around so many languages that I kind of got an ear for it. And I don't have an accent in almost any language that I try to speak. It's like a weird specific talent that I have. I'm a really good mimic. So like I grew up with, French, English, Russian, Spanish, for the most part. And so Italian, I was able to get quasi-fluent in about a summer. You know, I speak, learning Icelandic, and I'm getting okay at it. That's where my partner's from. I studied German. I have like a beginner's level in Levantine Arabic. I had a bar mitzvah, so I, can read Hebrew. I don't speak it. But again, it was always like something that I kind of got by osmosis, and it was just fascinating to me, but it never fit into my work until now. And then again, it's someone else's language. So, I think that ability to communicate with people on their level and meet them where they are somehow fits in a lot with the contact lenses to me. You know, it's sort of just like a gesture towards the audience that allows them to, or to a person or to whoever whomever I'm interacting with. I always just have had this very, very, very deep desire to be legible. I think that comes from not knowing sort of my origins so much. My mom was adopted. My father, I don't have much contact with him, and he didn't grow up with his like birth father. So there's all these sort of missing links in my lineage. I sort of recently got some more context on my like maternal grandparents, but like before, I just had no idea where, what I was. I didn't look like anyone I grew up around. I don't look 100% like either of my parents. There's a sort of there's always a gap, there's this wide gap around me that I feel like I've always sort of intuitively had. So I just have been looking and looking and looking my whole life, 26 years, to how to find bridges, and language was just, languages. I also studied Mandarin and quasi-fluent in Mandarin, like that, and things that were far from me, was just like really, 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 really important to feeling like I had a place in the world.
Do you feel like some of your practice is kind of about exploring those gaps, at least in a conceptual way?
I think someone else will have to analyze that. I think someone else will have to analyze that. I put like little limits on myself on how much I want to read into my own work, and into my own practice and into the psychological implications of it. Maybe someone will write about that someday. Maybe I'll be alive. Maybe I won't. I think that if I start looking for through lines like that, I think I might start to try to predict the future, anticipate, something that is to come. And I want to be present. I want to be current. I want to be here, and I don't want to get wrapped up in divination, because then I don't think the work will be good anymore. And I'm very happy with where I am right now.
Yeah, that's great, Miles. There's Werner Herzog, the German director, says, you should stop trying to analyze every single thing. Some things should just remain a mystery. And I think that's true.
Again, it's like the secret is there. You touch it, and then you leave it there, and I'm okay with that. And if I can keep doing that for the rest of my life, I'll be very happy.